This is a recording of Matthew R. Campbell, Matt Campbell, of 1327 Pepper Hill Drive, Lansing, Michigan, 48917. Matt's phone number is area code 517-321-6588. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing, Michigan. It was made on September 8, 1988. This is tape 1 of 2 tapes which Matt made with us.
Yeah, you ask the
Okay.
questions and I'll
Now,
try to respond.
Matt, what I'd first like to do is if you would just give me your address and your current phone number so that we've got that recorded.
Well, I live in a house not too far away from right here over on Pepper Hill Drive, 1327.
All right. Is that Lansing? A Lansing address?
Actually, I'm in Delta Township. It's just west of Waverly,
Okay.
in Marmore,
What's your zip code out there?
48917.
All right.
And the telephone number is 321-6588.
Oh, all right. Great. Now, maybe you could start us with where you came to Oldsmobile and when that was, and kind of take us through your career, if you would.
Okay. Jim, I was born in Sault Ste. Marie and graduated from high school in 1932. Couldn't find a job
All right.
because we were really in the depths of the Depression. I went back to high school in 1932, and I went back to high school again in 1933 but finally I was able to get a job in Lansing for the Auditor General Department on a tax deal. Well, anyway, I got a job working nights, and then I enrolled at Michigan State, graduated at Michigan State in 1940. And
What did you graduate in, Matt?
business administration.
Business administration, okay.
And I used to hitchhike back in those days. Didn't have a car, so I'd hitchhike to Flint and to Detroit to make application for jobs. I was offered a job at AC Sparkplug as a timekeeper. So I came down to Oldsmobile and was fortunate enough to interviewed Bill Schultz, or interviewed with Bill Schultz and Doc Brown, and they got me an opportunity to talk to Earl Schoen, who was the assistant comptroller at that time. And Earl hired me as a timekeeper, so I didn't have to take that job in Flint. I stayed in Lansing. And I moved from the timekeeping job in a few months to the payroll department, and then from the payroll to cost, and then seeing that just feeling that the opportunities weren't there for expansion within accounting as far as I was concerned, I asked Bill Schultz if I could make application for a job in personnel. And ultimately, I was, Mr. Niehaus, who was my supervisor, obtained permission, and I was able to transfer. And I started as a interviewer.
When did that, do you remember when that was?
That was probably in 1942,
Okay.
just during the war.
Mm-hmm.
It might have, well, I guess maybe it wasn't. That would be a little early. It probably was, might have been 44 or even early in 1945 when the war was over.
Okay.
Because I remember it was really touch and go when they were letting all kinds of people go. I was really fearful of the fact that I might get laid off too. But I was fortunate in being able to stay in personnel. And I became a representative of salaried personnel later on, and I became a supervisor of education and training when Stan Sessions retired.
That was about?
That was probably in about 1955.
Okay.
And then later on, I became a general supervisor in salaried personnel, and also was in charge of education and training.
Mm-hmm.
Had the institute students and the apprentice program, as well as other functions within salaried personnel.
Okay.
Then I worked in this capacity up until retirement.
When did you retire, Matt?
I retired January 1st of 1980.
Okay.
So I've been gone almost 9 years.
Yeah. When you first started working in the accounting department, where were your offices?
Initially, office was right on the assembly line.
Oh, it was?
I was a timekeeper in the assembly line area.
Car assembly?
On the back in, I guess, probably, if I remember correctly, that was building 20.
Okay.
And I can remember that was really quite a job, because I was a floor checker, and I had to go up and down one side of the line and the other to ask each fellow what his clock number was and check it off in my book. And it became a fun job, because I never could get finished doing this job in a day until I memorized all of the clock numbers of the individuals, and I could stand and in a place like 50 feet, and I could look 50 feet in one direction and check everybody off, and then I could look 50 feet in another direction and check everybody off. And the bloomin' truck drivers were the ones that gave me the most trouble, because every time I'd see one, he would always be going the other way.
Uh-huh.
And so it didn't make any difference. Once I learned their numbers, I'd see them going the other way, I'd still check them off as working. So
well, now that was, you had to do that every day?
Every day. In
Every
fact,
day.
It was, scheduled. I was supposed to do it twice a day, but it just couldn't be done until you learned every fellow's number. And there was a lot of switching around between departments at that time, from one foreman to another, if there was somebody short here or short there. So you had to you kind of catch these guys wherever they happened to be. But that was fun, because I'd see some of these fellows on the street, and I wouldn't know their name, but I'd know their number.
Uh-huh.
And I'd say, "Hi there, 103-027, and the fellow would look at his wife, and he'd say, "See, he knows me." That was fun. And
now the reason for doing that was so the guy would get paid the number of hours he was there?
it was just to be sure that they were working on the job that they were supposed to be working on.
All right.
That was the deal.
Okay.
And then I moved from that job up to a job in the payroll department, and
That was in
building 60 at that
Okay.
time, and that was really a fun job, because I had to see that the checks got out to the people in the plant. And just at the time that I was starting on this job, they were instituting a swing shift deal. Remember, it was wartime.
Mm-hmm.
And the fellows would work 5 days, but they were off 2, but we were working the week right straight through.
It was kind of a staggered thing.
Yeah, so some of these fellows would have like Tuesday and Wednesday off, this week, and another fellow would have Wednesday and Thursday, and so on. The thing I remember most vividly about it was I had a listing of all of the fellows that were supposed to be off, like on payday, and I have to get their checks out to their foreman, or for distribution prior to their being off for the 2 days. Well, these fellows would switch with other people because there was gas rationing at that time, and they could ride with somebody else, and they would do that.
Oh, yeah.
And so they would switch, and they would notify me, so the rate checks wouldn't always get out where they were supposed to be. And when I come to work in the morning, there'd be a slug of guys down at the foot of the steps waving their clock card stubs at me. Where's my check? Where's my check?
This is right in front of Building 60?
Well, in the basement of Building 60.
Oh, my God.
Oh, that was fun. I can remember the horrendous hours that I had to work to pull all those checks, and then to have them not right. It was kind of frustrating.
In those days we didn't have computers, so how were checks made?
We were just starting out, with computerization, because about that time a fellow by the name of Harold Brown and Harold Blow showed up, and they were to get us moving, and of course it took so much time for this thing to generate itself to the point where it was really effective, and you could get your checks out like on Tuesday morning or something like that for payday on Friday or Thursday night.
Well, did we paid like we do for the previous week?
Yes,
so to speak.
Yeah, it's the clock cards would come in on Monday morning, and the girls in the payroll department would check all those with their comptometers that we used at that time.
Oh, yes.
And, then we used to write the checks on a Burroughs check writing machine, and we had girls that were really good that were whacking away at those all the time to get those checks out.
How many people did it take to do that?
Oh, we had a lot of people.
Did you?
Yeah, we had a lot of comp operators.
Yeah.
A lot of, then later on turned into comp operators became sort of in a way obsolete because we were shifting over to key punch activities, and the key punchers would punch those out. So we switched a lot of these girls that we had that were comp operators. They became key punch operators. We had to hire a lot more besides.
See, after you got through with the accounting side of things and you went over to the personnel side, where did you reside then?
Well, we were in the basement of Building 60.
All right.
At the north end.
Okay.
Right across from the mailroom.
All right.
And there were, Raleigh Person was working in there at the time. Raleigh was an expert in the insurance end of the business. And he'd been in the accounting department for a long time, was in charge of insurance. And Stan Sessions was there. Harold Good was the, well, actually at first it was A.H. Brandel. Bud Brandel was the personnel director, and it was a fellow by the name of I can't remember his name.
That's okay.
But just doesn't come back.
That's all right.
But there was Doc Brown and Bill Schultz, and we had a couple of girls, Frida Motchek and Henrietta Rouse, that used to, answer the telephone and type up do the paperwork for us, and write people up, when they were going to go to work.
But you did all of your interviewing and all of that right down there in the basement of?
Yeah, we had little offices, and we made it a point on the salaried end to interview everybody that came in. That was, we were told that this was part of our job. And so we did. We talked to everybody and accorded them, even though they might not have been qualified for any of the jobs that we had, we still would give them a courteous type of interview and maybe even make some helpful suggestions to them about getting a job, someplace else. But we were busy too. That was a real activity at that time because particularly when the war was over, we used to, when Michigan State was getting a lot of returning veterans to go to school, a lot of those fellows were married, and they lived, in the Quonset village out in Michigan State, and their wives would come in and look for jobs, and we found that there were some excellent people that came to us at that time. So,
now you mentioned there was a big layoff at the end of the war.
Oh gosh, in Building 40, for example, the second floor of Building 40 had been just filled with people that were heavily involved in war work. And after August of 1945, when the war was terminated, you could have shot a cannon through Building 40 because it was just almost completely wiped out. Yeah, that was devastating. But we were able,
What did we try and do anything with people in those days, like find them other positions in other companies? Was that not
we
our
used to
assignment?
make up big books on people and with their credentials, and we'd send them to other organizations in the area. We tried to be as helpful as we possibly could to these people because they were all dedicated employees. We did make an effort to get those people back on as soon as possible. And we always have done that when during the economic cycles, when the automobile business would go into a decline, we would have layoffs, particularly foremen would have to go back to their hourly jobs, and we would make it a point to get those people back on salary just as soon as we possibly could when business started to pick up.
When we hired people back in that kind of a time frame, how did we approach the hiring process different than we did when you left?
Well, Mr. Skinner had become involved with, he was a graduate of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and he was in touch with them from time to time, and they sold him on the idea of using psychological testing to help in the hiring process. And it was only to be a part, of the hiring process. It wasn't to be anything that was exclusively. If you didn't do well on the test, it didn't mean that you were completely wiped out. For example, if we found that somebody didn't demonstrate that they had maybe the keenness, the sharpness that we wanted for a particular job, we knew that there were routine type jobs that a person like this would be probably very happy with. So we tried to match people in accordance with the job. If it was a job where a person had to, for example, just sit all day long and just pound away at a key punch machine, she wouldn't have to have the intellectual capacity, for example, of a person that would have to do some highly technical engineering activities.
When did that sort of come to pass? When did that start?
That was after the end of the war.
After the war?
Yeah.
All right.
I can remember Guy Hudson developed a manual dexterity test that we used for people that were being considered for maybe the apprentice program, to see whether, you know, they were all fingers or thumbs, and so on. Because this was part of the, if they were going to have to work on all these various machines, they had to be fairly knowledgeable. I don't know whether you ever took a test for GMI, but we were...
I took some tests. I remember a Cooter C interest test or something, and maybe 2 or 3 others that I had. I was there for quite a period of time that day when I came in.
Yeah. Well, we developed a test for what we call college graduates in training, engineers. Of course, you know, we always use these in connection with transcripts and other information that we would get from the school about the person's attendance record. We always considered that since we paid for absent time, we wanted people that we could depend upon to be at work. So it was the work ethic that we were looking for too, as well as their capabilities.
Did we develop most of these tests ourselves, Matt, or were they commercially available?
We used a lot of the tests, of course, that were commercially available, like the Cooter and so on. But the tests and the profiles were, and the formulas and so on to establish the profiles were given to us by RPI.
Oh, I see, okay.
The testing unit that they had down there. Professor Chamberlain, as I recall, was his name. And I remember at that time that we got Bob Dorshimer from RPI.
Yes.
And just through our contact, that is Mr. Skinner's contact with RPI. Bob did well. Had a very untimely death.
Yes, right. Did, Matt, over the years, you probably hired a variety of folks that you can remember, persons that you've had, and that are probably somebody that you will remember forever, and you might share some of those with us.
Well, you know, people at personnel are a little different than maybe people in manufacturing or engineering. In engineering, maybe you can come through with a big development like a rocket engine, like Gilbert Burrell did, and other developments that were done in manufacturing or sales where you sell 1 million cars and so on. But in personnel, about the only real pleasure you get out of it is to see some of the people that you've hired really blossom out and do well in the organization. And there were people like I had a call one day from Detroit from a friend of mine that worked at the tech center, and he said, Matt, he said, I've got a young fellow down here that I think you should get some divisional experience. He's a graduate of GMI, and he's been working here for a few years. Are you interested in young engineers? And I said, well, it certainly could be. Why don't you tell me a little bit about him and maybe send his credentials and I'll check it out. And so I got these credentials on a fellow by the name of Pete Estes, and had him in for an interview, and of course they selected him right away. Well, I always take credit for hiring Pete. Of course, it was a foregone conclusion when he came in that he was going to get hired because of his abilities. But Sam Donahue was another fellow that I hired, and Sam mentioned to me one day, he said, man, he said, how come? He says, you never tell anybody that you hired me. I said, well, Sam, I don't like to talk about my mistakes.
Right.
But Bob Stemple was another fellow that came walking in one day, just off the street, looking for a job. Had a bunch of drawings under his arm. Said he wanted a job on the drafting board. He was a graduate of Worcester Polytechnic Institute, mechanical engineer. And at that time, most of the faculty were telling their engineering students to look down their nose at taking a job on the drafting board.
Yeah.
But Stemple wanted a job on the drafting board. And so I sent him over to see George Jones. George could hardly wait to call me and say, hire him. So, and of course, we all know what Stemple has done, but that really is what gives us the greatest amount of pleasure, seeing some of the people that we hired. Mentioned the story about another individual that worked for Gale Price. His name was Bob Berger. Bob was a GMI graduate, and he called me one day and he said, geez, Matt, he said, you know, I can do what I'm doing, no problems. And I'm sure that Gale Price likes my work, but he said, I think I'd have greater potential in the sales department. He said, is there any chance you could get me an interview? And so I got the approval of Gale Price, and I sent him over for an interview, and he got a job in car distribution as a clerk, and then he moved to the field, and today he's the vice president in charge of Chevrolet division. So that's you know, just another example. We used to take a lot of people out of the factory and move them up into the ranks of supervision. We used to take people out of plant protection. Plant protection was a good starting job, but it was a job where your chances actually for promotion were not that great. So if there was some sharp individual in Homer Purchase, the individual that the chief of plant protection that I worked with, usually would give me the dickens when I approached him, but after he chewed me up and down for a little while, he'd say, now, what is it you wanted? So he'd give me the names of 2 or 3 fellows that he thought were doing a real good job for him that might have the potential to move. Joe Vermetti, for example, was one that went into purchasing, and he left as one of the top men in the purchasing department. So that was the type of thing that gave us the greatest pleasure.
How about campus recruiting? Did we do those kinds of things
well,
in those early days?
We got into it actually in, I think, probably 47 or 48. I think 48 was really our best year because I can remember in that particular year there was, we hired Walt Sparra and Jack Reitenauer, Seward Van Ness. There were about 8 or 10 individuals that we hired that particular year that got to be either staff heads or above within the corporation.
And those came from the campus sort of approach?
Yeah, we were out, we actually didn't do too much other than Michigan State. Michigan State was our principal source of supply, and we had excellent relationship with Jack Breslin at that time, and then Jack Kinney, and then finally Jack Shingleton. And if there was no other college that brought us the number of people, well, for example, the fact that we had so many of the veterans' wives working for us their husbands were students at Michigan State, and usually they'd come popping in prior to graduation and say, you know, my husband's going to be looking for a job. Is there any chance that you might have something for him? I remember one guy in particular that came in, and turned out that he was a very presentable looking individual, and it just happened that at that particular time we were looking for a plant tour guide. Mm-hmm. Imagine how these guys usually, you know, used to start out at pretty lowly type jobs. I hired a Notre Dame graduate one time as a chauffeur, working in the garage under Andy Flagler. But this particular person, his name was Van Peterson, sent Van up to talk to Les Carlson, who was in charge of ed. And I said, well, fine, we'll have him come on in. And, you know, he didn't show up, and he didn't show up, and he didn't show up. And finally I called his home, and his mother answered. And I said, you know, I've been waiting to hear from your son. And she said, well, Mr. Campbell, he just got home today, and he's out getting a haircut.
How about that? Uh-huh. He knew it.
Yeah. But
see, back in some of those times, didn't we hire a lot of summer people that were teachers that were?
Oh yes, we did.
Was that with malice aforethought, or?
Oh no. The idea there, we would hire. Well, the corporation had a program to hire math teachers and science teachers, and I would. They'd ask us to, you know, hire 3 or 4 or 5 ourselves, and then at the conclusion of the summer's work, they'd go down and spend a week at the tech center, and we would hire counselors because, you know, these counselors just didn't know sick'em about what industrial type jobs were like. They'd been in a bank, and they could see what bankers did and so on, but they'd never been in a factory. So we would get these high school math teachers, and we'd put them in data processing, and we'd put them in manufacturing engineering. We'd put them, the chemistry teachers, we'd put in a lab, and then during the period of the summer, I'd have a chance to talk to them from time to time, and I would feed them all kinds of information about General Motors Institute and about the careers that would be open to people, not only in a salary type job, but the apprentice program. Because we were looking for people to go into the apprentice program that had a good math and a good science background. Used to require that they have at least a year of algebra and a year of geometry to even qualify. And they were amazed, you know, at what people like that could make in the way of money. It was a very good job, and we paid even the apprentices. They got paid when they were going to school. I was very proud of the apprentice program, and I can remember a time when I had a fellow that was in charge of education and training for Opel division in Germany came over, and I said, you know, I've got 150 apprentices. I said, how many apprentices do you have over there? He said, oh, 500. I said, what do you pay them? He says, pocket money. You know, we were paying these kids a real good salary, even when they were sitting in school. They'd go to school like a day a week or something like that. They'd have to put a certain number of hours of schoolwork, and they'd get paid their regular hourly rate for going to school. So we tried to encourage the various high schools in the area to feed us young men that were interested. We had a little reward that we would give each year to the top industrial student in the city of Lansing. At one of their, whether it was Eastern High School or Sexton or whatever high school it happened to be, we'd go to their commencement, their honors convocation, award the check and the certificate.
What about, as time wore on now, the education and training program must have changed some. When you started, Matt, who was the like the apprentice?
Well,
Was that
I think
Guy
that
Hudson someplace in
Guy
there?
Hudson was the head of the instruction department.
Okay.
Then there was Jim Stoutenberg, I think, was the GMI coordinator.
Okay.
I don't know, was he your?
No, that was Stan. Not Stan. Was it Stan Session?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, before Stan was Jim Stoutenberg, and then after Stan was me.
See, you must have had training facilities.
Yeah.
Where were those?
Well, they were up at Building 28, was
Okay.
usually at the second floor next to the cafeteria.
Yeah.
And then, the corporation started encouraging us to give more training for our foremen. So we got interested in getting GMI. They had a management training activity over there, and we were involved then with them, and they sent people to Oldsmobile to serve as instructors, and they worked right out in the plant area with the foreman. We used to use the rocket room up in Building 64 for those activities as well. And let's see, I guess I've lost my train of thought. What were we?
The training and the...
Oh, we had people like Chet Frankie came in. Chet ultimately became the director of education for the
Oh,
corporation.
yeah, that's the name. Oh, yeah, right, I remember
There was,
that.
remember Don Olson?
Yeah.
Don was one of the instructors,
Okay.
and Don became a general foreman
Was
in
on
out
the
the plant.
warehouse or something, wasn't
Well,
it?
he was out in
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah, it was-
press metal plant.
yeah, and
Then
traffic.
he moved in to become the assistant traffic manager.
Traffic, yeah.
Then he left, Tom Darton hired him down into the logistics department down in at the tech center. So, and then John Powers was another one. There's a fellow by the name of Bob Jenkins who...
Oh, yes, he was I know Bob very well.
Yeah. And so we did, these guys were real good. We used to steal them away from GMI, which didn't make them too happy, but
Yeah.
they wouldn't stand in the way of a promotion. So we did. We used to have programs where we would get outstanding educators in from various colleges like George Odiorn. Remember George?
Oh, yes.
Management by objectives, as I recall, was his. And then there was a fellow by the name of Jennings from Michigan State that was a top consultant. They would come in and we'd invite all of our top management people to come to the Oldsmobile Auditorium, particular night, and we'd have, the Institute would arrange all these things. They would get people like Odiorn and Jennings and several others of that same ilk.
Matt, can you remember back to what starting salaries were for salary guys back in the early days?
Well, I sure can. I can recall that I started at $115 a month.
Okay.
And that was, par for the course at that time.
Yeah. And did you have lots of benefits in those days?
Well, no. Shortly after I got there, we became affiliated with Blue Cross.
Okay.
And at that time, as I recall, we paid for it. I don't know if we paid for all of it, but we, paid for part, but it was very inexpensive at that time. And then later on, of course, as the contracts would come up, the people in the factory would get additional money, and the salaried people were always compensated on an equal basis. So, we'd get more money. This was a kind of an easy thing, and I think that the people at the top who were making these settlements, at that time, weren't too concerned about what they gave out in the way of fringe benefits and so on, because they could always pass the extra cost on to the customer, and the price of the car kept going up and up. And we didn't have any competition, however, from overseas like we have now. So now we are in an extremely competitive situation. And the company, of course, has to try to pair, and you can see what's been happening with a lot of the people that have been retiring at a very, very early age. In fact, some of the students that I put in, I bumped into Jerry Cap the other day, and I was kind of surprised. He's retired. Yeah. Has Bob retired?
He hadn't as of about a year ago, which was the last time I saw him. But.
Art Cap is still doing well, according to Jerry.
What about during the big strike in the 40s, Matt? What happened?
Well, during that particular time, that was the first involvement that I ever had, and I think a lot of people in Oldsmobile ever had in the way of a strike. We went out to have lunch, and we couldn't get back in. And they...
You mean they had a big picket line, or?
Yeah, the factory employees wouldn't let us back in. It's something I couldn't quite understand. I had a little different concept, I guess, of the work ethic. I would watch on the day of the strike, usually like it was at 10 o'clock in the morning, they'd walk out. And they wouldn't walk out. It was just like the last day of school. They'd come running out, and they were jumping and skipping and hollering, and it was just like a great big holiday. Well, that particular strike lasted about 3 months. And I went home. I was told to go home and stay home and wait, for a telephone call if they wanted in. Some of the organization had been forewarned that maybe something like this might happen. Like engineering, they moved their activities out prior to the day of the strike so that they could continue to work elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But in our case, we were just told to go home and stay home and wait until if they wanted us, they'd get in touch. And my check would come.
Still paid, huh?
Still paid.
Uh-huh.
I got paid, finally they got an injunction, and we were able to get back in and went back to work, I think, sometime in the middle of December. So we were out maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went in, but there wasn't a heck of a lot to do because there wasn't any. I was in the well, no, this was in '45,
Yeah.
so I had just started in personnel,
Yeah.
but there wasn't really all that much to do except to be sure that that people got paid, and if somebody was on sick leave, that we would put through paperwork, to put them on sick leave, and so on. But those were kind of unpleasant times, and there was friction. There seemed like an antagonistic type of approach at that time, rather than I think today that hopefully through human resources management and different things, that they're trying to develop a better relationship, a better esprit with the hourly employees. But it's a matter of education, because these people that do the negotiating have to learn that they just can't anymore, if they're going to maintain a competitive posture. They're seeing that other outfits are going out of business, and there have to be concessions made. And I think that one of the concessions will be they've already asked us for a concession in the way of our insurance.
Right.
So I think that they're just using that that is the corporation planners are using that as a ploy to soften up the union to help get them to concede. I really think that there ought to be some. I didn't object to paying part of my Blue Cross before, but of course Blue Cross has gone up
Quite
the
expensive
decades
now. Yeah. Matt, who were the personnel directors you had to work with over the years?
Well, I worked for Bud Brandel to begin with.
How was Bud? What kind of a person was he?
Well, Bud was a very quiet sort of an individual, just completely different than Bill Mahoney. Bill was an extremely gregarious type of guy, and he was well loved by the factory employees. He knew everybody in the plant, and a lot of times when we'd have a quarter century club party, for example, Bill and I would be greeters, and we'd greet the people as they came in, and I would know everybody that was on salary by their first name, and Bill would know everybody. And he'd shake hands like the dickens with everybody, and just make them feel like he hadn't seen them in such a long time. He was just really a tremendous person. I really enjoyed working for Bill. I'll never forget the time, though. Dorothy, his secretary, called me up and said, "Matt, Mr. Mahoney wants to see you." I said, "For God's sakes, what have I done now?" She said, "I don't know, come on down." So I went down. I said, "Bill, you want to see me?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, "Matt," he said, "I got a job for you." And he said, "When I tell you what it is, you're going to wish you were back up at Sault Ste. Marie." And he put me in charge of the choir.
The choir?
Yeah, remember the choir that we had?
Yeah.
It started out in connection with the Michigan program, and we had a lot of people on salary and out in the factory that maybe they could play a fiddle or they could do little things. They had a show up in the auditorium, and they had this choir, and we had to get uniforms for them and set up, a place for them to rehearse. And
But you didn't have to be the director.
oh no,
okay.
fortunately they had their director, Dr. Mactell, but I remember one night or one day I got a call from Bill, and he said, Matt, he said, Mr. Wolfram has invited you and I and our wives and Jack White and his wife, and I guess that was it, over to Flint to see the AC Sparkplug choir. And I guess that was like Easter Sunday. And it was a bad storm coming back, and I think at that night there was an airplane accident over there. A lot of people were killed in a bad storm. But they had a real nice program. They had a girl from the Metropolitan Opera that was the star of the thing,
Would this have been when, in the 50s?
That would have been in the 50s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Mahoney followed Brandel?
Mahoney followed Brandel.
All right.
Yeah, and he had a fellow working with him by the name of Harold McFarland. I don't know if you remember Mac or not.
I don't remember him, no.
Oh, he was a tremendous guy. He left us and he became, I think, Director of Labor Relations, or maybe Personnel Director for Hydromatic Division.
Oh, okay.
And they had the fire.
Yeah? Yeah, 1953.
Yeah. And then he moved on to the corporation. He got a real top job in the salaried end of the deal, just beneath the vice presidential status. Top guy, and really a tremendous individual. He was in charge of labor relations in Oldsmobile. You had people like Francis Anderson working for him.
Oh, yes.
Remember Andy?
Yeah, Andy.
And there was Mo Jury, and Paul Freeland, big Janssens, Ed Janssens.
Ed Janssens.
Ed later on became the personnel director at Saginaw.
Oh, okay.
Central Foundries.
Okay. There's a Janssens over at Fisher Body now.
That's his son.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Yeah.
And then Harold Cutler came after Bill Mahoney?
After Bill Mahoney, Harold became the...
Okay. What kind of a person was he?
Harold was he was, again, I'd say more on the Brandel type than Bill. He was a good athlete and a good mixer, but he was quiet. He was not at all. Bill was, I guess, flamboyant was the best word to use for him. Real gregarious guy. And then after Harold left, Jim Lewandowski, who had come in from Detroit to become an assistant personnel director, was made personnel director. And then he left to become the vice president with the Saturn project.
Yeah.
And now there's a fellow by the name of Mike Zameen. I haven't seen Mike. I used to see him when I was out recruiting, because he'd be recruiting for his division, which I think was Saginaw Foundry or Saginaw Steering Gear at that time. And we had guys that worked in our department like Bud Darnell.
Okay.
Bud is with Pontiac now. Yeah, we used to have a Lansing Industrial Personnel Association, and Bill was very active in that. And we, had people like Bob Stone was a member of that, and the people in Salaried Personnel. And we would meet with, there'd be the Fisher Body people,
Okay.
like Erwin Hinchy and
Yeah.
From over there. And Motor Wheel, Rio. Treader Manufacturing, a lot of the small Lindell Drop
Yeah.
Forge, Atlas Drop Forge. It's a lot, but now this has all been consolidated. All of the what do I want to say? All of these industrial units have been consolidated with the more of the commercial type things like auto owners and State of Michigan,
Right.
Civil Service Commission, and there's a lot of outfits in it now that weren't even
Right.
viable when I was working, although like Manpower and outfits like that. They really have served a spot. We didn't utilize them. I used to have a very good rapport with a guy by the name of Pat Aiken, who was in charge of our printing department. And he had a group of girls working for him that they were in what we call printing and circularizing.
Yep, I remember that.
And I used to fill that department up with girls that I felt I could use in the office. Like I'd hire stenographers, typists, key punch operators, and I'd put them there. And Pat wouldn't let them out, from time to time, and then charge your department or some other department for their services. And in this way, I didn't have to wait 2 weeks, for somebody to give notice in a place to come to work. I would have somebody immediately
just go.
available. That's right.
Draw.
Yeah. I can remember there was only one time I ever had any problem with Pat. He was a real fine guy, but he really chewed me out because I was taking a girl over to his office to put her to work. And Gail Price met me at the gate. He says, I need this girl.
Never made it.
She never made it up to... Pat called me at the end of the week. He said, where is this girl? I said, she's working for Gail Price. And oh boy. He really lit into me. But I tell you, Pat Aiken was a tremendous person. When I was in charge of the secretary of the executive club, we used to have to send out mailings to our employees. When we'd take our people to the football game, he would fix the envelopes for me so that there'd be an envelope for every person that worked in, say, your department. I had all the departments. We'd stuff the envelopes and send the tickets out. He was a big help.
How'd the football game come to pass, Matt?
Well, this was another, I think, of Skinner's
that's a
ideas.
Skinner thing?
Yeah, and we would invite people from Pontiac and Buick to come over just to see what we were doing, because well, maybe they didn't have the facility, or maybe they didn't have, but they'd come to our picnics, they'd come to this, and they'd really see, and they'd go away goggle-eyed,
Sure.
what we did. That dinner that we would serve after the football game, or at Christmas time.
Football bust.
Yeah.
Yep.
Those prizes that we gave, we always made sure, that at least one person out of three won a prize. And then later on, it got so that even if you didn't win a prize that was up on the stage,
You got a turkey or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you could go out, use your ticket, and get a turkey. So
What did Wolfram do?
well, I tell you, Mr. Wolfram was a little different than Skinner, although I think George Jones would be a good guy to ask that question. I think that Wolfram was a very styling, conscious individual. He, it was in his regime, actually, that Oldsmobile really started to blossom out and sell cars. You know, it was 49 that we came out with the rocket engine. Then we had the two-tone paint and
The big
things.
zigzag down the side.
Yeah, beautiful cars at that time. Well, it was such a departure that, and that rocket engine really put us up there where we were making close to 1 million cars, and then finally over 1 million. And I think it was Mr. Wolfram's styling. Well, he was a self-made orator. He was in the Dale Carnegie class with me, and he was, let's say, not good
Not
at
so
all.
great, huh?
No. He, but he wouldn't stop. He took ICS courses, but this, of course, had nothing to do with speech. But he had tutors, and he ultimately, I think, became extremely proficient at speaking. But it wasn't because it wasn't difficult for him. He worked at it. He worked real hard.
It didn't start that way.
He would rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. And you could ask Tom Hendy about
we'll
how,
see him too.
Yeah, he would. In fact, we used to use the rocket room as a place for our education and training, and Tom would come in and say, "Geez, you fellows are going to have to get out of here because Mr. Wolfram wants to rehearse and he wants this place cleared out." So we'd have to vacate, and he'd use that auditorium, and he'd really be. I remember one time he was invited to be a commencement speaker at Lansing Community College. And he
Matthew Campbell, tape number 2.
Well, as I I was mentioning, Mr. Wolfram invited a group of students to come down from LCC, and he met with them in the rocket room. And he and Jack White and Fritz Bennett's tried to kind of pick their mind as to what they would like to hear from Mr. Wolfram.
Really?
Then he had a group of professors from LCC come down, and he did the same thing with them. Then Jack White and Fritz wrote the speech for him. And then I remember Fritz called me and said, "We'd like to have you come over and listen to this talk. Mr. Wolfram is going to give it now. It's going to be a rehearsal, and want to get your feedback on it." And I had just a couple of minor suggestions to make, which I think they did incorporate. But anyway, this was the type person. Now, prior to Mr. Wolfram taking over, we'd always had our executive club meetings right there in the building. He decided one year at the announcement show, to rent a train, take us all down to Detroit. Remember that?
Yeah.
And then at the show, or after the show, we were all over in another part of Cobo Hall in this auditorium, and Mr. Wolfram was the main speaker, but there was Jim Roach and, and a lot of the other executive vice presidents up on the stage with him. And Mr. Wolfram was at the podium delivering his talk. All of a sudden, he walks away from the podium and keeps right on talking. And, you know, this was a real tremendous departure because General Motors executives always read from that script. And I think he had this script etched on his eyeballs somehow because he just kept right on going, didn't miss a lick. And I think those guys in back looked, you know, they were amazed. And he really did a fantastic job. And we had a wonderful dinner down there, got back on the train, came home again.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a real nice departure from what, you know, we'd done in the past.
See, Matt, our affiliations with the LCC, anything there that's...
Well, that's interesting. I can't remember just exactly when this was, but engineering approached us and said, we're going to need some draftsmen. And there are no draftsmen coming out of college anymore. We need draftsmen to replace some of these people that are going to be leaving. So I went over to GMI because at one time the Institute did teach drafting, but they turned us down. They said, So then I approached Michigan State to see what they might do. And I talked to the people in the Extension Service. And a man by the name of Bob Scherer, as I recall, and Bob said, well, you know, Matt, we can't do anything exclusively for Oldsmobile. We'd like to, but if you could show us that, you know, there was more interest than just Oldsmobile, maybe, you know, we could do something. So I went back to the office and I called Fisher Body and I called the State Highway Department, and because they have road design, bridge design people, and I called Rio and I called people in Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids, Saginaw, Flint, and set up a meeting through Mr. Scherer, and we descended upon him, and we filled up the Red Cedar room out at the Kellogg Center.
Quite a bunch,
And they had a man by the name of Varner, who was the vice president, and they had a lot of the top engineering people there. And after we had shown them by a show of hands how many, you know, people would need draftsmen, Varner finally got up and said, well, we're sorry, gentlemen, but he said there's no place on this campus for a technical institute.
Nice.
So Claire Harrington and I then went down to Tri-State, and we lined up. They had a program, a cooperative type program, just like GMI, and we got some young people out of school that were interested in going down, and they'd move back and forth, and we started that program. But in the meantime, Dwight Rich called me. Dwight Rich was superintendent of schools, and he said, Matt, he said, I understand that you're looking for a place to train some draftsmen. I said, Dwight, we sure have, but, you know, we're now working with Tri-State down in Angola. Well, he said, I've got something in the back of my mind. He said, I'm going to send a young fellow down to you you know, it couldn't be just for you, but we're thinking of a program to train people for Barker Fowler and for Rio and Motor Wheel and Trainer Manufacturing, anybody that has any skilled tradespeople, so that we could. And he said, I think, you know, if we can generate enough interest, we could do something. I said, fine. Well, that was my first introduction to Phil Gannon. And he came and he picked our brains about what our needs would be and so on. And
Now,
he
was this before LCC had started?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, long
Yes.
before.
Yeah, this was, well, it was still just Central High School down there.
Okay.
And so the next thing, he called me back and he said, we're going to establish a Lansing Community College. And he said, we're going to have programs. And, our relationship with Lee Witter and I, Lee was the director of Salaried Personnel at that time. We worked very closely with Gannon. And in fact, we provided them with instructors because they didn't have people at that time, although they did hire a lot of Michigan State University industrial arts teachers to come in and work. And but they hired people like Floyd Wright from our apprentice program, Doug Lenz, Claire Blakely, Bob Shaw. Bob is still teaching for LCC. He's been with them ever since the very word go at LCCs. He probably has more seniority than anybody down there. But it was really remarkable, and that's the one big thing that I feel so proud about when my wife and I drive by that school and see how it's burgeoned out, the beautiful buildings. It's really, and the number of people. I can remember too how we called Phil Gannon down one day to Lee Winter's office, and Lee and I both talked to him. Said, Phil, we've got a problem here because we've got people that work in our factory that alternate shifts. And they work 4 weeks on days and 4 weeks on afternoons.
Yeah.
And, you just can't go to school in a situation like that. Now, we need something that will correlate with shift changes so that a person can go to school for 4 hours at night when they're working the day shift, and then they can go to school in the daytime when they're on the night shift. And Gannon says, I think we can work that out.
How about that? Isn't that something?
So that started that deal, and we got in fact, even the LCC sent people down, and we registered them right in our cafeterias so that they could sign up for classes. They didn't have to take time off to go down and register for a class. They were extremely cooperative with us.
Were we kind of the drivers in a sense then initially on?
I think really, although the Chamber of Commerce got into it too, and the Education Committee of the Chamber of Commerce, I was a member of that committee.
Yeah.
And another thing that we did, and this is, I think, Lee Witter's idea 100%, but I was heavily involved in it. He set up a program with a Dr. Louis out at Michigan State. And it was with the Chamber of Commerce. We called it resource reassessment. And every year we would have a meeting. 1 year we would be out on a campus. The next year the campus group and the business group would meet downtown in the Civic Auditorium. And it was an opportunity. Each organization like the Chamber of Commerce, if it was going to be downtown, we would be responsible for the program. And if it was the college, Jack Breslin or some of his people would be responsible for putting on the program. We had, people that really opened up our eyes when we listened to these fellows. I can remember Dr. Koenig telling about you guys in making cars ought to be thinking about gasoline, because gasoline is going to become a scarce commodity. Well, you know, I think a lot of our people then kind of their ears perked up. You hadn't even thought about it because there were never any problems about gasoline before. But it was things like that. I can remember a program in which I was the chairman from the Chamber of Commerce. And I had to I had a panel of people up on the stage. I had a fellow from Michigan Bell, and I had Colonel Holmes from the Selective Service Commission tell about deferments and things like that, which I thought might be of interest to both of the communities. I had Bob Stempel on the program, and he told about the Toronado. Well, you know, when we threw it open to questions, Blum and Stempel was the only guy that got any questions.
Really?
Oh, he did a fantastic job, and everybody just asked him. You know, he's a very eloquent person, and he really knew. I remember making a trip with him one night. He was making a presentation to an SAE group down at Tri-State in Angola. And he did a lot of this at various campuses, and I was with him on this particular night. And after the formal part of the program was over, he had 2 Polaroid projectors, and he kept those both going. And these kids started asking him questions, and he just answered questions and answered questions. Finally, he had a Toronado, and so they all went out and stood around that Toronado, and he rolled up his sleeves, and the hood was up, and he was pointing out all these different things. Finally, you know, it was about 10 o'clock at night. I decided to go back to the motel, and he was still there talking to these kids. That was the energetic individual that he is.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I can't right off the top of my head think of any more questions. But
Well, I think you've emulated J.P. McCarthy here today, and you've done a real good job.
I'm sure there's probably bushels of things we forgot to talk about. But
Well, after you talk to Bill,
yeah, we will see Bill.
you'll no doubt he'll fill in a lot. He must remember all of the history. Be sure to give my regards when you
I will
talk to
do
him
that.
tomorrow.
I will do that.
When he heard I was sick, he used to call up and tell me to get the lead out of my
Right.
and get out of there.
Fixed.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I guess I will go click unless you can think of something else, Matt.
Go ahead and click.
All right.